Over the past few months, I had dozens of coaching sessions with ambitious students, and almost all of them had the same leaks. Once they implemented the 5 changes I'm going to show you today, they walked away as bigger winners from the 1-2, 1-3 and even 2-5 live poker tables. These are all actionable tips that you can use straight away and make 2025 the best live poker year of your life. And if you play a lot at the 1-2 and 1-3 level, then the last tip will make the biggest difference. Which common habits are silently draining your poker profits? Here's a big one. Let's look at a concrete example. There is a limp at a 1-2 game and you decide to isolate King-Jack offsuit in the hijack. You make in 15 to go, which is on the bigger side, but a good idea to isolate a passive limper. But then the button, who is an aggressive player, raises to $45. Everyone else folds. You suspect he's pushing buttons, but you're not comfortable 4-betting because it would mean risking nearly a third of your stack. So what do instead? You call. You might think that you are ahead of his range and you can get all his money if you flop big. However, this approach has several problems. 1. Flopping big would mean having 2-pair or better, and this only happens just over 2% of the time. 2. You are out of position against an aggressive player, which is not a great spot to be in. 3. Your hand might be dominated if he has ace-king, kings, king-queen, and jacks. And 4. You're paying a lot of money to see a flop. Even in GTO land, where you would only have invested 2 big blinds, this would be a losing call. Let alone now that you made it 7.5 big blinds pre-flop, and now he's made it 22.5 big blinds. So calling in this spot is a big mistake. And here we're dealing with an aggressive opponent, but a lot of players feel that they can't fold even when a net 3-bets them. Now, I'm not saying you should always fold to 3-bets, but what I am saying is that you have to pick your battles. And I would start by using a strong range of hands to call with. In many cases, I'd rather 4-bet than call the 3-bet. But at live low stakes, quite frankly, folding is usually your best friend when you face a lot of aggression. So the first change I would make if you want to make 2025 your best poker year is consider folding more than last year. Tip number 2 is a close cousin to this one, but here it's less about the type of hand you have, but more about the price. Let's say we have King-Jack offsuit again, but this time on the button. And instead of a limp ahead of us, there is now a raise to $15. Again, pretty much all of my students would call in this spot. They have a decent hand, and now they are even guaranteed to have position. But again, this is the worst option. Even if the raise had been to $5 instead of $15, I wouldn't like a call. Why? It's not so much because someone behind could squeeze, although that is also a consideration, but the main reason is that in high rake environments like these 1-2 games, where the casino often takes more than 10% of the pot straight away on the flop, this is simply not profitable. Yes, even if you have an edge over your opponent, you can't expect to recover more than you invest in the long run. And what if we have a hand like pocket 4s instead? A call would be slightly better, but I still don't love it because it is still quite expensive. But this could work if your opponent is the type of player who can't let go of a big pocket pair even if you raise him on the flop or on the turn. But if your opponent is not of the worst kind, it will again be tricky to make money. If we have a good chance of getting this pot multi-way, then I would totally be on board with calling with a hand like pocket 4s. But then I would definitely not call a hand like King-Jack offsuit that plays terribly multi-way. So, the second change I would make if you want to make 2025 your best poker year is call a lot less. Play a 3-bet or fold strategy on any position except for the big blind. The next one is another very common one, and it happens mainly to players who are studied but who then misapply the theoretical concept of value betting because they are not really advanced enough to draw the right conclusions. Here's a perfect example of that. Under the gun limps, low jack raises to 10, there is one call and you make it $40 with pocket tens in the cutoff. So far, I love this. We do exactly what I wanted earlier. We play 3-bet or fold here and won't call behind. The limper folds, the other two players both call. Pot is now 125 before rake. The flop comes 9-8-4 rainbow. We continue with a $50 bet and only the initial raiser calls. The turn is an offsuit deuce, so we can go for value, so I'm okay with this bet of $100 into a pot of 225, although it is already getting somewhat thin. But the mistake I'm talking about happens on the river. The river card is another 9 pairing the top card. When villain checks, hero now bets again, this time for his remaining $185. Now, if you're up against a really weak calling station who will call you down with pocket 7s or ace 8, then by all means fire this bet. But against everyone else, this is a clear check behind. If we check here, we have a chance of winning the pot. I'd say it's still not huge because villain can have jacks, queens, and at these stakes sometimes also slow played kings and even aces. And of course he could have a 9. But if we bet now and we don't expect him to call a triple barrel with an underpair or weak pair, then tell me one hand that we are ahead of when he calls our bet. I can't think of any. Whenever I ask any of my students why they bet in this spot, they can't come up with a satisfying answer. Because there is none. So when thinking about betting on the river, always think about the 2 reasons for betting. A, to get a weaker hand to call, or B, to get a better hand to fold. If neither of these apply, like in this example, then just check. Because otherwise you commit a costly polarization mistake. The fourth change that you have to make this the best year of your poker life is to play more straightforwardly. Here's what I mean. Say you call pocket 4s in the small blind after 4 players called the raise from early position. Big blind calls as well, so we go 7 ways to the flop. The flop is ace, queen, 4, rainbow. This is of course a great flop for us, so we want to put as much money in the middle as possible. How do we do that? Well, certainly not by checking and calling, but by betting and raising. I don't hate a check here because it is likely that one of the other 6 players will either bet an ace or take a stab with some nonsense. But I would actually prefer a bet here because it's likely that we get a few calls. But if we check the original raiser bet small and 2 players call, we have to raise. Instead, hero calls in this spot. But not all is lost because we still have 2 streets to get some value, right? The turn is an offsuit deuce. We check again and the original raiser now bets a bit bigger. 1 player in between calls. Not raising in this spot is criminal, yet hero goes for the call again. The river is another queen. We check and it checks through. We win against ace king and ace 10. But how much do we win? The minimum. I'm pretty confident that at least one of these players would have called a check raise on the flop or on the turn. But we sandbagged our set and waited for these players to either bluff or bet thinly for value. Both of those things are not something that low-stakes players like to do in multi-way pots. The main mistake players make post-flop is calling too much, not bluffing or value betting thinly too much. So do yourself a favor and eliminate slow playing from your weapons arsenal. We just talked a little bit about multi-way pots, so let's continue in that too. What percentage of pots in your games goes multi-way as opposed to heads up? My guess is at least 80%. But most of the advice out there is for playing heads up pots, right? And this is why even good players often feel lost in multi-way pots. Like our hero in this hand. He raises ace-jack suited and gets called by 4 players. The flop comes jack-6 deuce with 2 hearts. Hero bets small and gets called by 2 players. The turn is a 4. Hero goes for value again and now the big blind check raises. Hero is understandably a bit confused but calls. The river is an offsuit 9. The big blind goes all in. Hero doesn't love it, but he calls because the flush draw missed. Villain quickly turns over pocket fours for a turn set. So what was going on here? Well, as I said above, players at low stakes tend to call too much and bluff too little. We can see this perfectly with this opponent. He called a flop bet with a low pocket pair, although there was a bet and a caller ahead of him. He didn't bluff though. And then when he hit a set, he started playing his hand super fast. So what can we learn from that? There are two things. To bet for value with good hands like a good top pair or better. And the second one, and this is the fifth thing you need to change if you want to crush live poker in 2025, fold to aggression, especially in multi-way pots and especially on the turn. If you want to improve and analyze your hands, there is a free tool available to review any hand you've played, including and specifically multi-way hands. In this video, I will tell you everything about this new wonder tool.